Hi guys, and welcome back to the Wavefrnt podcast. Today we have Ananya Chadha.
Ananya is a 17-year-old incoming freshman at Stanford University. During high school, she made projects in everything from genomics to blockchain to brain-computer interfaces. She's also spoken at some of the most prestigious conferences in the world, including Web Summit, Elevate, APDC Congress, among many more. So welcome, Ananya.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to chat with you guys.
Yeah. So what have you been doing this quarantine? Have you been listening to any good podcasts or reading any good books or anything like that?
Yeah. So I've been working with my friends on a variety of projects, which is quite topical for this podcast.
Yeah.
And also working. So for work, I've been working with the Canadian military doing coronavirus projections. And our reports are sent to Health Canada, the government. One of our reports was read by the Prime Minister to help inform decision making for coronavirus in Canada. And
That's
then
cool.
On the side, I've been doing a bunch of projects of things that I've really wanted to do but haven't had the time for. So I'm working with Sloan on building a hot air balloon to go to almost space, and we're going to run a variety of experiments on this balloon. I've been working also on a few different neurotech projects, working with Ion and Ria, which are two of my other friends, on essentially a few different ideas. I can explain them later if you're interested. A bunch of different projects. Oh, and then also learning really fun things. I learned how to juggle. I learned a little bit of how to skateboard. I greatly improved my chess. I learned how to cook. I learned how to drive. I'm finishing up learning how to fly. I went hard on just doing things that I enjoyed. So that's what I've been up to.
Yeah,
Wow,
that's
that's
a good
impressive.
turn. Learn how to cook, learn how to juggle, learn how to fly. Just quick.
Why did you want to do all those things? Was it just stuff that you thought would be interesting and then you just went for it?
Yeah, so I think this applies to pretty much all my projects since the start of time. I just get an idea and I get really pumped about it, and then I just go. And I just take action immediately. So one day I woke up and I was like, you know what? I'm going to juggle. And then I watched a YouTube video, and that same day I learned how to juggle. So there isn't really a large time difference between getting the idea and starting the idea. As soon as I get excited about an idea or it pops into my head, I almost immediately just get started. Literally for everything, even for flying, which you'd imagine has a high barrier to entry. I remember the day I found out, I told my dad the same day we went to the airport, the same day he registered me for classes.
Wow, that's crazy.
So
I remember
the
the first time I was flying. I actually thought, you're right, it was going to be way more complicated, but I went with the aviation club at my school, and we went out and they were like, oh yeah, okay, so we're going to fly. I was like, I'm definitely not qualified to be doing this.
Do you fly too? That's amazing.
Yeah, I've done it a few times.
That's exciting. Woohoo.
Yeah. But there's the then club heads were both pilots and good pilots, and they're yeah, we're going to learn how to fly, and they didn't think it was that big a deal. But then we just went out, and it was this tiny airplane, a Cessna, and it was just me and the pilot. And the pilot only half spoke English, so I was already it was not good. And then it started to shake, and I was like, why is the plane shaking? And he's like, oh, don't worry about it, or something like that. I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of scary. And then we taxied out or whatever. And I thought my understanding was that once we got up to a certain altitude, I'd be able to take control or whatever. But right away, he just gave me control and was like, all right, we're going to take off now. I was like, oh, okay. But it was really fun in the end. But yeah, it's
That's
definitely
amazing.
It's not easier, but a lot of these things I think have a much lower barrier to entry than people realize.
I would totally agree.
Mm-hmm. So you said that you were doing all these projects. How have you been able to have time to do all this stuff, juggle just out of the blue and stuff?
To be totally frank, I still have to work on my time management. I kind of just put things in my calendar for when I want to be working on certain things, and I prioritize which things I need to get done first. And usually things end up working out. So let's say I have 4 things simultaneously running. I always do a little mental check-in of whether everything's in shape. Usually about one time every day, I'll put in my calendar exactly when things are, so I know. I'll sometimes make a schedule on paper, knowing like when I set deadlines for myself, and then I work backwards, being like, okay, if by this date I want to have this done, then when should I work on it? And then you manage your time accordingly. And I think with like pretty adequate time management techniques, then and like prioritization, most people could figure out some sort of system that works for them to make sure they get the things they want to do done. I really like this idea, which is most people don't schedule their time. So what ends up happening is if tomorrow someone says, hey, can you get this done for me by tomorrow? Everyone will be like, yeah, sure, because you want to honor other people's time. So you'll get something done by the deadline that they set for you. And immediately whenever someone asks you something, it's like they've made it to the top of your priority list, regardless if that's actually your top priority. And the reason for that is because I don't think us individuals are good at setting priorities for ourselves. So if we honor the deadlines for everybody else, we should also honor the deadlines that we set for ourselves. So I think it's important to keep in mind that like having you saying that you want to have something done should be thought of as just as important as someone else telling you to have something done by a certain date, which I don't think a lot of people do, but I think it's actually super, super important.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's probably like a really good way to be productive. But like, I guess it's also probably good to, if people ask you to do stuff, for them to like understand that you have other priorities as well and stuff like that. But I think that's definitely a good mentality to approach things.
Oh yeah, like you definitely have to like communicate with them
Yeah.
if you can't make the deadline.
Yeah. How do you like stop kind of procrastinating and all that? Because you said like your own deadlines, you know, enforcing those. Like, how do you just like be like, oh, I'll just move it to like an hour down the road?
Yeah, so I am a procrastinator, very much so. But I always get my things done still. So I only procrastinate to the amount I know that everything will be all right. So let's say I have something due by the end of the day. Maybe I'll procrastinate till like 9 p.m. and then start working on it. And so it'll be done by midnight. Um, to be frank, as long as you're hitting your deadlines and you're holding accountable to those, I think it's good to let your mind wander a little bit. Like there's been a few studies that show that like letting your mind wander while you're like subconsciously pondering a task helps improve creativity. There's been other, like there's a really good TED talk on it by Adam Grant. I think you should check it out. So I think procrastination has value. I don't think you should beat yourself up for it, because I always see people like they do something that feels like misaligned with their goals or expectations for themselves, and they get really angry at themselves, and that puts them, I think, in another negative feedback loop. So if you do something, like I think it's really important to have like forgiveness for yourself and self-love for yourself, and recognize that like you're still chilling. Don't beat yourself up if you're not working hard enough, or if you're not working well enough, or if you're working too hard or something. Just let it happen and make sure that you just get your things done. Oh, also, just to add on really quickly, I think something really powerful is if you remember why it's important for you to do it. So if you remember why you want to have something done and it gets you really excited, and you like put that in your mind so forcefully that like you want to get this done, and you really, 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 really want to, then I don't think you'll procrastinate, because you believe it's your top priority.
Yeah,
That's true.
On that note, I have a big question for you here. So you said like priorities, you know, like what's the number one priority? So like for you personally, is there like a problem in the world that you want to personally like work on solving in the future, and then that you want to dedicate most of your time and resources to at like 25, 50, 75? Like, what is that problem or thing for you?
Yeah, there's a few things that come to my mind, and I hope to solve one of them in my lifetime. I think one big problem is waste management. So you might be like, why waste management? That's so odd. If you think about it, pretty much everything that we have has been mined from the ground, turned into a product. Like this has been mined from the ground and turned into a product, and then it will end up as waste. So it will eventually end up in the landfill. Everything around you, everything that you look at, like this computer, these headphones, my t-shirt, it will all eventually end up in the landfill. And so what ends up happening is this like very linear cycle of how materials progress through our world. which isn't inherently in itself bad. The problem arises because now we're running out of our initial source of materials. Like a lot of really key materials used for electric batteries are like, we're seeing shortages. Like there aren't a lot of it left in mines around the world. There's been a bunch of companies to try and fix this. You see the rise of ocean mining. So there's a lot of startups trying to find nodules of metal on the surface of the ocean floor, because there's so much more ocean on Earth than there is land. But what's ended up happening is we're really pretty much exacerbating all of our resources everywhere, and we don't have enough. And so what if you could mine landfills? What if you could take stuff that was sent to the trash previously and get value and bring it back to like in a circular supply chain? Additionally, manufacturing is actually one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases, and like industry. So if you would manage to be able to fix these supply chains, I think it could do a lot of good in that sense. That leads me to the second problem. I think a lot of people know this, but climate change is insane. And if you break down climate change, because I feel like climate change is a problem, it's also a symptom. Like, what is the problem that you have to solve climate change? So there's a few different ways you can tackle it. I'll break down a few. So one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas is power generation. So the question is, why can't we convert to renewables? You would be like, well, solar exists. The problem why we can't convert to solar power and hydropower right now is because currently the grid works. Like if the whole city of Toronto wanted to turn on their lights right now, there needs to be enough energy existing for everyone to be able to get power immediately. Whereas solar and hydro don't work consistently to be able to fulfill that demand. They're relatively sporadic, just in the sense the sun isn't always shining all the time. Did I say hydro? I meant wind.
Yeah.
I think hydro is more consistent. I meant wind. So yeah, wind isn't winding all the time. So the problem is you can't have a grid that's totally made up off of these like changing phenomenon. You need consistent power. So that's where energy storage comes in. And if you manage to increase, I was watching a talk on this by one of the Nobel Prize winners, Stephen Chu, I think, used to be head of Secretary of Defense, or Secretary of Energy in the US. And he says that if you can increase power, I don't have the number, I want to say power storage for these large plants, it's either 5 hours or 5 days, which is a large gap. But if you hit one or the other, then you can get 80% renewable energy, because it can satisfy the gap for how long you need to store energy to make sure that you have the ability to satisfy the whole grid. So there's a lot of different ways to do energy storage. Some people are looking at like one of the biggest ways right now is like pumping water up a hill. And then you pump the water up a hill when you have energy. And then when you don't have energy, you let it roll down and spin the turbine. And that's super efficient. It's so efficient, which is absolutely amazing. So yeah, energy storage. Another one is carbon capture. Like, what if you could take out carbon from the atmosphere? So there's a lot of really unique startups trying to take out carbon emissions from the atmosphere. So I would say battery storage and carbon capture are two areas I'm really excited about. Another, I'll just list some problems more quickly because I've spent, just in case you guys listening want to solve them. That would really make my day, and it would be amazing and stellar. I think obviously around the world, but people don't have enough food or water to eat. So, or food to eat, water to drink, clean water, and healthy food. So how can you get like scalable, nutritious food everywhere across the globe? I think another problem is healthcare access in a lot of places. Is there a way to distribute that a little bit more effectively? I think you've seen a lot of growth, but there still is work to be done in like microfinancing and setting up financial systems for people around the world. What else? Oh, housing is expensive everywhere. So how could we reduce the cost of housing? Neurotechnology is a field that I'm excited about. So I think there's a lot of potential there as well for like curing different diseases. Yeah, I think if you're looking for problems, also look at the UN Sustainability Development Goals. The SDGs are a really good place to start as well.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I don't know if this is just me, but like a common theme I saw with like all these problems is that I find people, like as a singular being, act in like a much more morally correct way than like an entire entity. And so something like you mentioned like before waste and stuff, I know like fast fashion is like horrible for that. They like waste so many clothes. Even though the people buying those clothes as like a singular person, I'm assuming a lot of them are like quite moral to some degree, but then like the entire entity, regardless of if they know the implications, will continue to buy these clothes because they like them and they don't think they're the problem. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of like the solutions to this have to be like making a new product or a new solution that follows the path of least resistance. And so like if we want to have like a circular, I don't know, flow of our clothes or whatever, then we need to find a system that's cheaper than really disposing clothes, which I think is going to be really hard. But yeah, that's basically my thoughts.
I mean, these are like huge problems, and like we've been hearing about these problems since like kindergarten. I remember we used to have like police officers come in, talk about like waste management and recyclability. Do you know if there's any like, do you know of any startups or people currently working on any of the problems that you listed that you think like these guys, they're doing the right thing, or this is a good solution, and like that's something you want to like work with?
Yeah, there's a bunch. I totally agree with what Sloan said. Like, you have to make sure the incentives are aligned for this new behavior to catch on, which is really hard. There are a few startups. So let me just try and think of a few. One, so there is research done, I'm forgetting the university, but essentially you could take old clothes and decompose them into their original materials. So let's say you have a cotton shirt, you can then get cotton, like recycle cotton out of the shirt. Um, and there has been more research that like even if the clothes are more like diverse in material, then you can also decompose them, although that's much harder. But like if you have denim, you can recycle the denim, and then with those raw materials you can then create new clothes. So I think that's a really promising technique in startup that a lot of people have been working on. And the question becomes then, can you scale that to other things other than clothes? Like, is there a way to decompose things from different?
Well, I heard cars kind of like people say that buying electric cars is like really good for the environment, but I was doing some research on it like a couple of years ago, and it's actually if you buy like a new electric car, it's way worse for the environment than buying like a really used gas powered car because of like
Really?
all
Tell
the
me more.
yeah, because like all the chemicals and stuff in making an electric car, like all the chemicals and resources needed to make the batteries and whatnot are actually like really bad for the environment. And so like bringing all those things into existence because you want a new car is actually way more harmful than just buying like a ton of used stuff.
That's so fascinating. I actually
Mhm.
didn't know that. Now I know.
Yeah. But I think that like that issue also extends to like a lot of other areas where people just assume that they've, you know, they see on a very surface level that this thing is good and so they'll buy it, but they don't really understand the other implications of it and like what the further impacts are. And I think it's probably good to be educated on a lot of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's just like it's a matter of just being sustainable in all of our processes. I mean, like the stuff, all the things you mentioned, like with waste management, you know, it's about being sustainable and having something that doesn't basically ruin the whole world and make us keep everything in landfill. Same with like energy storage, like having a sustainable process to like get energy, then distribute energy, then get it again. And I think it's like it's all about just like how can we make everything that we do sustainable and not like a one-time use. Like I think it's similar like how SpaceX is working on rockets that can be used more than once. And I think it's like the fundamental solution is just how we can make everything in the world like a sustainable solution and process.
It's also like I feel like that's kind of hard as
Yeah.
well because humans just by nature I feel like are kind of destructive in a way. And so like telling us to make something that where we can like live on this planet indefinitely, I feel like is almost this is kind of depressing but like unself-fulfilling, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
But
think
maybe that's
perhaps
just really
like
pessimistic.
I think what you're trying to say maybe is that like us humans don't really think for the long term. We
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
are much more short term in the way that we think. And then it's hard to really consider your actions with the long term implications as well
For
because it's
sure.
just so far out. So it kind of evades your consciousness. Um, yeah, I think that's a problem.
Especially when it's like I think a multi-lifetime thing because we're so used to being confined to like our lifetime or even less than our lifetime. The fact that we might have to think, you know, 100 years or a couple hundred years or a couple thousand years ahead is like almost inconceivable, I think, to a lot of people, and rightfully so.
Yeah, and I think it's just we're like really good at being ignorant and just like not knowing about things and just like kind of like keeping it to the side. And that's like what I've personally seen. I think that's the reason that we don't like some of the problems that I hear about. I'm like, I didn't even know this was a thing. Like this is something that people are dealing with every day, but I just didn't know because that's how we've set up, let's say, our education systems, or that's just how we've been consuming media. Is like we're in this one narrow focus, and we're like it's very easy for us to like evade the other things that are happening and the long-term implications and the things happening in places that are far away from us but still in the world.
For sure. Well, this took a much more depressing turn than I thought it would, but
No,
um,
I don't think it's depressing. I think there's opportunity. I genuinely believe
yeah,
that us humans will figure it out. I think we're a really adaptable species. Um, when things get bad, we will step up to the plate. We're a
yeah,
species, I think, that has a lot of care and compassion. And you have no other choice but to be optimistic. You
yeah,
literally have no
that's true.
other, like Peter Thiel gives a stellar talk on this. I think you can find it on the internet, like at South by Southwest. He explains why he does like a breakdown of if you were optimistic or pessimistic and what would happen and what the outcomes would be. And the only choice is to be optimistic.
Hey guys, this is Drew butting in here. As an entrepreneurial high school student, I've started many projects and startups, but have found problems in finding co-founders and ideas. That's why Sloan, Adam, and I created a platform for high school students to post project ideas they have or projects they're working on, as well as who they're looking for specifically. At the same time, those wanting to work on early stage projects can message the creators of the post on the platform and can hopefully work with them. So if this sounds like something you would be interested in, you can check it out at wavefront.com, spelled without an O. The link will also be in the description. And now we'll get back to the podcast.
So, anyways, yeah. Speaking of which, you mentioned that you want to work on a lot of these things. Would you ever think of like starting your own company or your own project, or would you want to like work with somebody who's already making progress on this?
Yeah, I know that I want to start my own thing. And I don't think, like, people always ask me why. I don't think there's a super rational reason for wanting to, though I can supplement it with rationality and like justify this claim. It's just because when I was little, like super little, I've always wanted to do this. Like I wanted to do this my whole life, pretty much. Like I read letters that I wrote to myself when I was like 10 years old to my future self. And they pretty much all say like, did you invent something yet? Have you started something to help people yet? Like
Wow.
essentially like, did you start a startup yet? And I don't know where it came from, but I've just always wanted to do it and I have a blast. So
Yeah.
I know that I definitely will. Um, I want to start something by the time I graduate. So that is the
Mm.
plan. And yeah, I have a bunch of ideas running and I'm testing them out now to see which ones might actually have merit.
Hmm. Drew was telling me, I think, about this like a couple months ago. But you know how like people always say like, oh, all these successful people dropped out of Harvard or dropped out of Stanford, or like, oh, they just had such a drive and they knew Apple was going to take off or Facebook was going to take off. But in reality, I think a lot of them stayed with whatever they were doing until they knew that Apple and Facebook and stuff like that were really going to be successful. And then like Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of Harvard once he saw that it actually had merit. And I think that's like a really good perspective where people, you can do it like on the side. And then once you have like, you validated the product, then you start pursuing it further.
Yeah, at the same time, I read this book called Originals by Adam Grant. I don't know if you've read it, but basically, like he was saying that like statistically people who are like already working a job and like start as a side hustle have been more successful and have been more creative because it's like kind of like you're diversifying your investment portfolio and your risk because you have this like non-risk aspect where you have your job, so it allows you to be more creative and add quality and think about it more deeply and flesh it out instead of thinking about how you're going to make a living from this like very ambitious moonshot or some project like that. I wouldn't say it's true for all situations, but it was a very like interesting perspective, I thought, about like how these companies and stuff are founded.
Yeah, for sure.
I I don't think that there's a set way or a set time to found it. You can find examples from all different types. Like Jeff Bezos had a job and then quit his job. So he graduated and then did that. Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of undergrad. Bill Gates dropped out of undergrad. Larry Page and Sergey Brin dropped out of grad school. Even though they like finished undergrad and most of grad school, Elon Musk pretty much only finished undergrad and then did it. Um, so I think it is whatever makes sense for you then at the time. And it doesn't make sense to go into it with a set, I'm going to drop out by this day.
Mhm.
I think you just have to start something, and then whenever it makes sense for you, then you do it. I think you can grow a lot between these time periods, but you also grow a lot when you start your startup. So even when you reason it, I don't like, I think it's just so super independent based on each scenario.
Yeah, I agree. And I think people like it's a really good mindset to go into these like types of projects or whatever. Even if you're in high school, like do what you can to make this project successful, but also keep like in the back of your head an unbiased opinion of like always evaluating, does this company show potential? Am I wasting my time? How can my time be used like most beneficially, I guess, to like when you're ever pursuing something.
Yeah. On that note, I'll switch the topic to technology a bit more. So, Ananya, is there like a specific like emerging technology that you're most excited about for the future and you think has the most potential to make the biggest impact on the world?
I think that's neurotechnology, brain computer interfaces. Um, they're absolutely insane, and they will most definitely impact humanity in such crazy ways.
Yeah. I thought about this quite recently about like how technology has influenced our lives and how it will in the future. And like if we think about, computers were invented and now we have smartphones in our pockets and now we have like watches and people say all this stuff. We're slowly becoming more dependent on technology. But like where does the line being drawn between where we exist and where technology no longer exists if we do something like that?
Yeah, it's
It's
cool.
like it's a difficult question to answer.
There's like so many ethical questions with brain computer interface. I think it's like the most, it has the ability to do the most damage, but also like the most good. It's like insane. I remember when I first heard about brain computer interfaces, I was like I can't believe this is like real. It just seemed like a sci-fi type of thing. But I mean, it's exciting for sure. And I guess it's inevitable. So we got to just make it, do it, like do good with it ourselves. Um,
And Elon and Joe Rogan's podcast mentioned that like with brain computer interfaces we won't be able to talk like anymore. Like we won't need to talk anymore because that's such like a useless way of communicating. And after he said that, I started to think about like how bad we are at communicating that we're like what we're actually thinking. And it's like I didn't realize it until you think about it and like whatever you're saying. But we actually lose so much information whenever we talk.
Yeah, especially through like misunderstanding and all that. I remember I was listening to the same podcast and he was just like the way, like, let's say we stuttered, like somebody doesn't hear the right word, or like the pace, the tone, it just like could deliver a totally different message. And it's kind of like not efficient. Like I
Mm-hmm.
remember another like similar perspective was like, I can't believe we like communicate with only using our fingers, you know? Like why can't we use our mind to type and do all that? Why do we have to, why are the fingers the means for a keyboard, like on our keyboard and communicating? So it was interesting. But I mean, I guess we'll see. And
Yeah, I think brain computer interfaces could be like really beneficial in the future, but also like do we want that? Do we want to be able to communicate instantaneously? Because then like what's the difference between us and computers at that point besides like our creativity? And then if we lose that because we upload all information ever or like become a hive mind, are we still humans? Like at what point is it kind of like this the line in the sand has been drawn, you know what I mean?
I mean, like brain computer interfaces, you know, they have like thousands of applications. You can think of so many applications at the top of your head, like downloading skills, reading dreams, just there's like a ton of different things you can do. Is there like one specific application that you think is like the most cool, or something that you find like really, really interesting?
I think to begin, we should like define what brain computer
Oh yeah, yeah.
interfaces are, because I don't imagine a lot of people are aware. So essentially, brain computer interfaces, neurotech, brain machine interfaces, is technology that lets you connect your brain to external machines or computers. So there's a lot of different technologies that I would say fall into this category. Some are non-invasive, so you would tape an EEG to your scalp that reads your brain waves, and your brain is always constantly emitting these electrical signals, and these electrical signals create these waves that you can pick up with electrodes. So you can read them like that, You can also have invasive or semi-invasive electrodes where they cut open various amounts of your scalp and put in electrodes physically into your brain to then record information. So with this information you're recording, then you collect from your brain, analyze it, maybe process it, and then use it to control something or do something. There's a bunch of different applications. I can share with you some that are particularly fascinating. So first, paralysis used to be one of the medical most difficult challenges if someone was paralyzed. So recent research in brain-computer interfaces has managed to do a lot for people who are paralyzed and help cure paralysis. And I remember reading one study where there was a monkey and it was paralyzed because it had a fissure in its spinal cord. So it had a break in its spinal cord. And as a result, the electrical signals from the brain couldn't travel down the spinal cord to help the monkey control the rest of its body. So what researchers were able to do is collect information from the top of the spinal cord. So they would collect the information that was supposed to be sent on the spinal cord. They would send it over the internet, process it at a computer, and then they would resend it to electrodes at the base end of the spinal cord. So the electrodes then at the bottom would then re-stimulate the signals that were supposed to travel all the way down. So they were able to effectively bypass the broken part in the middle. And that was done by brain-computer interfaces. They had, I think they're in clinical trials for it, and it's showing a lot of promise as well.
Yeah, I know I watched a video, I think it was of this guy, so he, I think, like, was diving off a cliff or something, and he fell and, like, kind of broke his back, got paralyzed, and this was, like, a human, and I think right now it was, like, in clinical trials, and he went for it, and it was really dangerous, but now, like, he can move his fingers, and he's slowly regaining mobility, so, like, that's kind of, like, crazy, because I know that paralysis was one of those things that, like, doctors and stuff used to be like, you can't touch, you know, it's just like, it's a thing that you're going to have for the rest of your life. But like now there's like the actual potential to actually cure it, which is like mind blowing, I think.
And then when you think of like how much better machinery is and how much stronger machinery is than our own bodies, like do you think it would be possible for us to like choose to upgrade our bodies so that we have stronger legs or like stronger arms, or do you think even people would want that?
I think that's tangential from brain-computer interfaces, or maybe it's not, but like that gives me more like bionics feel.
Okay.
So, but I think it's totally feasible. Like if you're going to give yourself a prosthetic, why not give yourself a prosthetic that's as good as possible, perhaps better. And of course, there's so many ethical questions that then come up, and like a debate gets launched as to what is just, what is all right, what is fair. But I definitely think that that is feasible and doable. There's also been research at how you can collect signals from the brain or your nervous system to be able to detect what you want to do to the prosthetic. So like right now I'm thinking like close hand, but I'm not really thinking, let me close my hand. I'm just kind of, I just do it, you know? So how do you read those signals up from my brain that tell my hand that it's supposed to close? And can you do the same thing with a prosthetic to tell the prosthetic hand that it's supposed to close? So there's been a lot of really interesting research in that area as well.
Yeah, I know a couple of years ago there was the clinical trial with like mice where there was like a mouse in one country and there was one in another country, and they made a maze, identical maze, and then it took one of the mice like 2 weeks to finish the maze, and then it like sent those signals to the other mouse that did it on its first try. So like with that, I mean, like if that's possible to do in humans, do you think you can like start like downloading skills and like knowledge and all that like from like a cloud potentially in like the way future?
Yeah, I definitely think in the future, like I've heard people talk about like downloading knowledge and skills. Like how can you implant memories? Like scientists have also been able to implant fake memories into the mind of a mouse. So if you're able to implant memories, how can you implant memories of learning knowledge or learning skills? And what might that mean? Obviously, I would say these things are pretty far out. Like not super, like not a million years out. Like I would say probably, I'm actually pulling a number out of the sky, but like I would say like
a while
out,
down,
but not so far. Like maybe 200 years.
Yeah.
which is like far, but like it's not that far.
It's also, but like it's kind of difficult to conceive what a culture might like value in 200 years.
Yeah,
Like,
or
so
maybe
much has
less
changed
because
so
we
much.
develop everything so exponentially. Like, you know what's crazy? I didn't realize this. Okay, wait. Okay, let me Google. When was the first plane invented? Can you guess? What do you guys think?
1947.
What?
1903.
Ooh.
So 1903 was the first plane. It is now 2020. In 100 years, we managed to go from like these dinky little things that just glide in the sky made out of wood to space shuttles. Like, that's insane, the amount of development. Like, if you told someone back then we would be sending planes to space, they'd be like, are you crazy? But we managed to do that in like 100 years.
Yeah.
So what is then, like, if we went from these dinky things that glide in the sky to space shuttles, what comes next?
Yeah, I mean, and especially because like now we have so much more access to information and like with the internet and all that type of stuff, like it's not as privy to a certain class of people. So I think that's like is going to just like be a catalyst to reaching these new heights
Yeah,
of technology.
that made me think of the same thing. I forget what book it was exactly. I'm pretty sure it was Stephen Hawking's book, but he was talking about how energy has been transferred through history, and like most animals transfer knowledge through evolution and biology. And so we might, let's say, grow one theoretical part every 10 years, where we slightly evolve to help us, and we learn a bit more about hunting, or we learn a bit more about camouflaging, or we learn a bit more about something. And then after that, once we learned to communicate, it was like intergenerational information transfer, and that was like extremely beneficial. And then once we learned how to write, we could like store information indefinitely. And then once we learned how to like use the internet, well, then we just have like all information ever, like indefinitely, in the cloud. And so like when we think about like our massive leaps in progress, I think a lot of it has to do with how much information we're able to store and transfer. And you might be right with like brain computer interfaces. If we could talk or like download our consciousness, that could be the next like amazing, like great leap in energy transfer information.
Yeah. I mean, on that note about like innovation and how things are changing so fast, I mean, something that's been trending this month or the past couple of weeks has been like OpenAI's GPT-3, which like I don't know too much about, but I'm pretty sure it's like you can like tell it to like create a specific website and it'll do it for you. Or you can tell it to do like kind of anything and it'll do it for you. I mean, I know there's a lot of flaws with it as well, but like, what are your thoughts on it? Have you like gotten a chance to use it or see what it's about, and like what do you think about it?
Yeah, I actually have access to OpenAI's API for GPT-3, which means that I've been able to play around with the algorithm and test it out for myself, and it's really cool. And you've seen a lot of really amazing things people have done with GPT-3, some of which have been, you type in a few sentences and it'll continue your essay or story and it'll make sense. You can write like a school assignment essay on a certain topic and it'll make sense. People have trained it to be able to write certain tweets that sound really insightful. I set up a Twitter account that is made with tweets only from OpenAI's GPT-3. And they're pretty, like, honestly pretty cool. People have also done it to like set up programming websites. So if you want to program something, you can type in information into GPT-3 and then people have been able to convert that into a functional website. So it's amazing in what it's able to do.
How familiar you are with the back end of it, but like, how does it even come up with tweets? That seems like such a like abstract process for like a computer to do, because doesn't it have to choose a topic and then like think about what it wants to say and stuff like that? Like, how does it even begin to think of what it's going to say?
Totally. You should follow my OpenAI Twitter account. It's at Orbital Monkey.
Yeah, I saw it because I know you like posted about it, and I saw it and I was like, wait, I was so confused. I was like, did you post those or was it like the OpenAI thing? And it was just like, I was like, that's kind of like crazy. Because I know, you know, The Hustle, like the newsletter, the daily newsletter, The Hustle. So I listened to the podcast where his CEO, like his podcast with his CEO, like the Hustle podcast, And he was like eventually I just want to like start making my daily newsletters with like not GPT-3 but like whatever the next version is or when it's like capable. So like that like can totally like change the way like content creation works and just like anything works. And I think that's like it doesn't seem feasible in my mind. Like I was like, how does that even work? Like how does it, but it's like crazy, like because we see it happening in front of us. So
Totally. And I think it's important to also say that like this is not the thing I think that will lead us to AGI or artificial general intelligence. So let's say artificial general intelligence is this like AI that's good at everything and it's like insane at all tasks or can learn other tasks. People don't think perhaps this is the right way. I was talking to my friend Tan Mei, who I worked with at IBM doing artificial intelligence. And he had something really fascinating to say. His opinion was that he thinks the future of AI is not larger modeling networks like OpenAI GPT-3, but rather neurosymbolic reasoning. To explain a little bit, essentially on my computer, like I could not run a OpenAI GPT-3. Like it's a huge neural network, requires a lot of computational power to run this thing. I have the API, which means that I can like ping their systems. But if you want to develop something to scale and become accessible, then and like become feasible for anybody to deploy themselves, GPT-3 is perhaps not the way to do that. But despite that, it's actually absolutely insane and like really great progress for humanity.
Mm-hmm. I think it's definitely like an optimistic way of doing that. But like, why do you think it would be important for us to have it like a self-contained general intelligence versus like pinging a server or a website or whatever?
Well, let's say you want an AI to be able to do a lot of tasks. You want it to be able to run in a lot of places. Like if you want it to do a lot of tasks and it is centralized. Okay, let me try to explain that again. There are a few reasons why perhaps like having one centralized location to store an AI like is the best. I'm sure there are more that I personally don't know, but to give you some off the top of my head, one, sometimes not all things have access to the internet very accessibly. So that's where you hear edge computing as a field come in. For example, let's say a car that needs to run this AI to be able to drive well. Autonomous cars are becoming more feasible. But this car is driving in a place where there's really spotty internet. You don't want your car's AI to not be able to reach the server. You want it to be able to run locally on the car and compute on the car itself. Let's say, again, now we have this AI centralized in one location. If it goes down tomorrow, then a lot of people just can't operate their things. And if it was used for a lot of critical tasks, tomorrow they can't because it's in a centralized place, which is why people advocate for decentralization for a lot of things, because it helps you reduce risk and vulnerability from having one stakeholder control it all.
When I think of like what you're talking about, there's three different ways I could like see a solution to that. And I don't know, tell me if they seem valid, but you could either like increase Wi-Fi access so there's like no place on the earth where you don't have Wi-Fi, which will be very, very difficult. But I don't know, maybe in the future that's possible. Second is to like create a extreme like increase in storage, like our storage capacity in a very small area, which also seems very, very difficult. And the third one would be to like make something that just takes up a lot less storage. But I don't even know how you would make something that takes up so little storage, like given how programming works. Like,
yeah, and it's not just storage, it's also like computational power.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's why my friend Tan Mei said neurosymbolic reasoning is the thing that he thinks will be able to do well rather than these really large neural networks.
And what is neurosymbolic reasoning?
To be honest, I couldn't give you a good explanation. I think I also need to do some good research on it.
Okay, yeah. Well, it sounds really
I'm gonna check it out today, and then I'll get back to you because I'm also curious now.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think it like when I saw the demos of like GPT-3, it seemed like it like I literally most things you can understand and it makes like, oh yeah, I guess with a lot of programming or a lot of information that's possible. But this seemed like near like it almost seemed like magic. It was so like crazy.
Um, so to kind of steer off, like I know you were on the investment committee at like Babel Ventures, which seems like interesting. So like, can you tell us a little bit like what is Babel Ventures and like what your role was there?
Yeah, Babel Ventures is an amazing biotech VC fund. So they invest in biotechnology. So venture capital fund. Let's say you have this huge idea for this biotech company you want to start, but you need money to get it off the ground because there's a lot of capital required to start your startup. Then you go to a venture capitalist and you say, hey, this is my idea. This is me. Can you give me money to run this? And the venture capitalist is like, okay, I'll give you money. In return, give me 20% of your company. So you make that transaction. They give you $1 million. They take 20%. Now you're off to the races. And if your company gets sold tomorrow, and it gets sold for $10 million, they'll take 20% of that. So you can buy equity in different companies. And this is what venture capital does. So we were an early stage biotech VC fund. And so my role was to first look at companies that were coming in, got to check out so when you apply for a venture capital to fund you, you have to submit a deck, so a presentation slide deck. And on this PowerPoint, you have your idea, you have the team, you have your technology, you have your vision, you have your traction, if you have any yet. And I was meant to analyze those, do research on the industry, provide my thoughts and my recommendations. And then the next step would be talking to the founders to understand more about them and what they envision for the future. And then we had this meeting where we all talked about the companies that were on the table that made it as far through the funnel to the last stage. And then I provided my thoughts on the companies I had looked at, being like, we should invest in these, or I don't think we should invest in these, or yeah, these ones seem really cool, or yeah, no, not feeling this one. And we were able to have like a pretty logical debate about which startups we thought we were going to succeed and which ones weren't. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, the goal for the venture capitalist is they need to make a return because it's not their money they're investing. They're investing money from different people who want to make, so like there's a rich person called an LP, and the rich person gives money to the venture capital firm so that the venture capital firm makes more money to return back to the rich person.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. It seems like with tech though, there's so many, like you can either like, go to the sky, or you can like plummet really quickly. So I guess there's a lot of like gambles involved with that stuff. Not necessarily involving luck, but like you need to go in a lot of different avenues to make something that really is successful.
There's this really fascinating model with venture capitalists, which is most of your investments are expected to fail. You are expected to have a 10x return in 10 years. So in order to get that, you need 1 or 2 or 3 companies to go to the moon. And all the other companies can tank. But if you have one Facebook in your bunch, if you have one Uber in your bunch, if you have one Slack in your bunch, that will be able to compensate for all the other dead companies. So venture capitalists expect most of their investments to fail, but they are hoping that they have a few that, because when you make a return in startups, you make a giant return. So they're hoping they have a few that compensate for all the ones that lose.
I know you were only there for like a short amount of time, but was it really obvious when you saw something that was going to be super successful versus not, or was it kind of undefined?
So I don't have the best experience personally because I don't know, like the companies that I liked or didn't like what happened, like they're still going on, but it hasn't been a long enough time frame since I was there to know whether they'll succeed in the long term or not succeed in the long term. I've heard a lot of different opinions from people who are very talented in the space. Some of them, for example, Chamath Palihapitiya, who was one of the first people at Facebook. Now he runs Social Capital, and he is the owner of the Golden State Warriors, chairman at Virgin Galactic. He thinks that at some point it's just all luck, and you can't really know, and that anyone who tells you that they know are making it up. I think he says this in an interview that he gave at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, but everyone's like, oh, I invested in Facebook or Twitter, look at me, I'm a genius. But the reality is that you've also invested in a bajillion of other things that failed. And like, you can't, like, it's hard to know. So
Mhm.
I think that there's a level of both. Obviously you can try your best to filter based on like how you feel about the people, what you think about the idea and the timing and the industry and the team dynamics. But at a certain point, it's obviously still ambiguous. Underdogs win.
Yeah, agreed. I think it's really hard to predict, especially with technology and social media and like what's going to catch on. At some point, it just comes down to, I think, like when you launch your product, what the demand is at that time, and like all these different factors that are like so hard to control. You know what I mean?
There are three tenets that venture capitalists use to make their decisions. Sometimes some use this model, which is team, traction, technology.
Mm.
And if you're early stages, you should have two of the three. So you either have team or traction, team and technology, or technology and traction. So I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. So like when you were in these like boardrooms, how did people talk? Was there like one person who just like present their ideas and then other people would be like, nah, it's a bad idea, that's a good idea and we should invest in it? Or like was it more of an open discussion about what you guys thought would be good in the future?
Obviously, I think different companies have different dynamics as the way they
Yeah.
conduct meetings and conversations. I think for the most part, though, it's always a discussion. Um, I really enjoyed the firm or like Babel Ventures, because everyone was so kind and welcoming, and there weren't a lot of power games that I see it in a lot of other corporate places,
Mm-hmm.
which I think really takes away from the ability for good ideas to come out if people are playing status games. So
Mm-hmm.
for us, it was just honestly a true, honest debate. And I argued my points and my reasoning. They argued their points and their reasoning, and we just followed the logic, and also like a bit of intuition for things that are hard to convey consciously, but subconsciously. So that was also accounted for too.
That's really cool. I was like reading this book a little while ago, and they talked a lot about like subconscious behavior, and then it also got into diversity. And like with all this, like the Black Lives Matter movement and like so many progressive movements that are doing a lot of good, I think it's important for people to realize like why diversity happens in like that a boardroom setting or like in any group at all. Like the fact that you can bring different opinions from like a high school student going into university now, and like being female and being from all these different backgrounds, I think is like so beneficial when you're coming to a decision, particularly around like venture capital, where like it's almost impossible for a single person to know the success of a company. I think it's like it's really good that they're able to do that.
Yeah. To add on, and then Drew, I think you have something to say, so I'll give you the floor after. But what ultimately determines if a product succeeds, like assuming the technology gets there, is the markets. The markets decide in capitalism, and the markets are representative of a lot of people. Like you have people who are female and male and young and old, and like have a whole bunch of differences. And so it's important, I think, just to understand how do the markets respond, to ask people from different sides of the market, so you can even get like a more accurate perspective.
Yeah, I think especially because like a lot of like startups and stuff, like a big part of it is like there's a lot of assumptions being made, you know? So if you have like a diverse group of people, you can maybe break down those assumptions or like actually see what the real answer to those things are, because instead of having like one specific perspective, you have perspectives of, as you said, like different markets, different types of people, how they think people will respond. So like it decreases the assumptions a bit, which I think is helpful in the startup space. So is there like any idea or company that like when you were there you're like, this is like super fascinating? I'm sure there was like a lot of them, but is there like one that just like stayed in your mind um
There
there?
are a lot of cool ideas. I haven't checked in with these companies, so I don't know the internals of how they're going, but I really liked a lot of their ideas. For example, first, She-Oak Shrimp was making lab-grown shrimp. So making shrimp is really bad for the environment. It's a really inefficient process. So they were making shrimp meat out of shrimp cells and cultivating them in a lab. There was Galley that was making lab-grown cotton. So they were able to grow cotton in a lab, taking significantly less water, space, time, energy. Um, there's um, there's a few companies that were doing interesting things with AI, cannabis. But yeah, those two really stuck in my head.
So another thing, like I know you've like talked to a lot of like world-class people, you know, you've talked to some like the top people in the world, and like how exactly do you get in touch with these people?
Yeah, so I love conferences. Conferences, 10 out of 10. Oh my goodness. So the first time, so the lady that runs Babel Ventures, name's Ba Manuzzi. She is stellar, a stellar lady, 10 out of 10. And the first time I met her was at a crypto conference in San Francisco. And I went and I said hi to her, I talked with her briefly. And then I went to another conference in Japan, and or was this in, no. I went to another conference. This time it was a blockchain conference. And I was at this blockchain conference and someone is like, you need to meet this blockchain lady. And then he gave me an email introduction to this lady, and it turned out to be the same lady I had met at the crypto conference. So it was Bob. And then I hopped on a video call with her. And from there, she invited me to come help out and learn at her investment fund. And so it was essentially just building a relationship with her and getting to know her. All of my jobs came from something like that. I worked at Consensys, which is a blockchain development fund, because I was at a hackathon, which is another type of event. And I was able to talk to people who worked there, build a project that they liked and they wanted to see me continue at their company. Let's see here. IBM, I got my job at IBM because I spoke at a conference and the person at IBM was interviewing me. I got my job at Sick Kids because I sent them a cold email. So that one's different. But I would say for the most part, conferences or cold emailing, I think, are excellent way to develop professional relationships. Networking is kind of a scary word. Sometimes I think people get turned off by it. But what I think you should think about it as like, you know how in high school or school we're really good at making friends. How do you make friends with someone who is older than you in the professional world? You don't just make friends. It's a different type of a relationship. It's a professional relationship. And it's sometimes like asking for directions. You don't know where to go. You'll ask someone for directions and they'll tell you the way and they'll help you out. The same thing occurs in networking. You're like, hey, I'm interested in like computer science or something. Can you give me directions about this industry? Can you give me some advice? And I think for the most part, people are happy to help you. It's not like when you give someone directions, you feel used. You're happy to have given them directions. And I think the same thing applies. I have a whole video on my thoughts about networking that I think is helpful. So you can check that out on my YouTube channel. Wow, I'm just plugging myself. But I genuinely think it's so valuable. And I genuinely think people should learn more about it, because all of my opportunities have come from getting to know people, meeting people, talking to people.
Yeah, and then with the cold emailing, I mean, like, it's so like random on like who will respond and who won't. Like, is there anything you do to kind of like increase those chances, or you just like pump out the emails and hope that someone responds?
So there's two things you can do. One, you can try and make your email better to increase their open and response rate, or two, you send out a lot of emails. I don't like sending a lot of emails because it's a lot of work. And I have a few people that I want to talk to, and I just want to talk to them. So I focus my efforts very small on a few people and try and get them to respond. I think there's a few ways, like a few different tactics you could use in your emails. And I think I talk about this as well in my video, but if you begin, try and just be honest, like introduce yourself, and say where you come from, how you stumbled upon them, and why you're so excited. Then show that you've done your homework and you've done your research. So explain, like, if you're reaching out to them, ask them some personal questions about what they do, ask them or show them work that you've done in their space. So you can link your videos, you can link your articles, you can even just link your thoughts, like just type in things that you've done. So like, why should they talk to you? Like, get them excited about you as well. And then like compliment them, compliment their work, because you're like excited to be emailing them because you're reaching out to them. And then ask if they're willing to hop on a call and you would love to get their advice. I think old people love giving advice and they're really open to it as well. So definitely just ask, and I think you'll be surprised by how many people respond.
That's really good advice. And if you want to know more about networking, then go check out Ananya's YouTube channel. Yeah.
So important though. Networking is actually insane. Like all my opportunities came from talking to people.
Hmm.
Like it's crazy.
Yeah, it's true. Speaking of conferences, I know you've spoken at a lot of conferences, and like, what was your experience doing that? Like, were you ever nervous? Did anything ever go like poorly? Anything like that?
I don't think I'm ever nervous. Even when I've made my speech last minute, and by last minute I mean like an hour before I'm actually supposed to be speaking. Um, I think how I think about it is a few things. So first, you need to pretend that you are a boss. Have you seen the movie Catch Me If You Can? It's a Leonardo DiCaprio movie that I think has so many important lessons in it. So it's about this man, Frank, I think is his name.
Yeah, Frank
And
Abigail, I think.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's based on a true story. A true story. So there's this man, Frank Abagnale. I think I'm pronouncing it right. He dresses up or pretends to be a pilot, and everyone thinks he's a pilot. He pretends to be a lawyer, and everybody thinks he's a lawyer. He pretends to be a doctor. Everybody thinks he's a doctor. He's a 19-year-old or something younger than that even.
Yeah, it was. You keep going.
He's a teenager, and he's pretending to be a doctor, and people let him operate in the ER. He's a pilot, and people let him sit in the cockpit, but he's actually a teenager with no qualifications whatsoever. And I think the implication of this is that if you embody yourself as something, then most people will just genuinely believe that you are that. So if you think to yourself, I am a boss, everyone else will see it subconsciously, and they will know that you are a boss. So when you go on stage anywhere, you just channel that inner thing. You're like, I am here for a reason. What I have to say is valuable. These people don't know it. I am a boss. And then you go out there, and I think people receive it really well. And whenever I do these talks, I'm always prepared, and I know what I'm saying. And I can talk for hours and hours about these subjects without any script. So I know that I'll always have something insightful to say. So I kind of just have enough trust at this point to know that I'll be fine. And because of that, I'm not really nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was there any like learning curve when it came to like doing these talks? Like, what do you think has changed since when you first started doing them versus like how you are as a person now on stage?
Yeah, I think giving talks is a skill that is constantly refined. And as I have done more and had more opportunities, I've seen a lot of best practices that are important and can drastically improve the impact and power of your words. One thing that's really important that will totally change the way that the audience perceives what you have to say is stories. So us humans are connected by stories. We love stories. We are enamored by stories. Religion is stories. We believe in stories. We are the only species on this planet that says, like, please do not kill me, or please give me food. And then in return, you will go to heaven, which is really powerful. It's like us humans communicate in ways that are so different from any other species, in the sense that we're able to captivate everyone with like things that aren't necessarily like physically real. So people, like, we have evolved to develop and remember stories really well. And so when you're giving these presentations, if you can incorporate storytelling, then people will remember what you have to say really well, as opposed to a list. Or if you're just saying a takeaway, like if you're just saying like a valuable lesson, people won't remember it. But if you preface the lesson with a story and then the lesson comes out and emerges, then people will remember it. Mm-hmm. The second thing I think is important, obviously there's like a lot of different presentation things. You need to speak slowly. You need to make sure you don't say ums or uhs. But I think additionally, it also helps to change the way that you speak. Sometimes when you say something, you can say, like, iPhones are really cool. Or you can say, I have something really cool, iPhones. They're different in the sense that one front loads it with the answer, and one creates suspense and then gives you the answer. So even the way that you phrase sentences can be changed to elicit more or less audience engagement. So I think that's also powerful. And then I think third, know why you're there, set your purpose. So be like, I want this outcome by the end. Like, I want the audience to be more informed, or I want the audience to be excited, or anything you want. And then when you have a goal in mind, it's much easier to achieve it rather than give a presentation and hope the outcome will be good. Don't just do an action and hope that it'll turn out all right. Like, try and think about the end and then go striving for it.
Yeah, for sure. And is there a conference, like, just curious, like, what's the largest conference you've spoken at, like, attendees wise?
Probably Web Summit. I think there were like 70,000 total people at the event. I don't know how many in particular were listening to my talk, much less than that, but still substantial. Actually, I have a new answer for my what have I learned from talking. So maybe you can cut out the last one. I think the most important thing when you're giving a presentation, the most important thing is you want to captivate people's emotions. Humans are emotional. We are not purely rational. And people remember how you made them feel. There's this rule called the peak end rule, which states that after you leave an interaction, you will most likely remember two things about it. The peak, so how you felt at the peak of the interaction, like in terms of emotions, like what was your highest emotional state? And then the end, so how did you feel at the end? So when you give a good presentation, you need to make sure that the beginning is good, so you get them involved in the first place. You have like a peak, so a part where they feel humor, or they feel anger, or they feel sadness, or they feel something. And you want that emotion to be heightened as much as possible. And then the ending has to be strong. You need to fill them with curiosity or wonder or confusion or something. And when you think about what emotions do you want the audience to feel, then I think your message is just so much more remembered.
I think that's really true. Is there any like particular talk you remember giving that was like you thought your best story or best way you conveyed your emotions?
Yeah, I started doing this a lot more, but the first time was Elevate. I think I had this one line that was really good. I was talking about neurotech, and then I said something along the lines of, what if your brain could be hacked? And it sounds more like odd being all isolated, but in the story flow, it was like, oh, no, my brain could be hacked. And I got a lot of feedback based on that like line, that people really appreciated that. And there was this like really scary picture on the screen. So I thought that was powerful.
Yeah, I mean, like, even like I've listened to your talks, right? So I have like a different view. Like, I think like just even like the fact that you're really enthusiastic and all of that, and you have like varying emotions and tones, I think that like really drives the point through. And I think like that's really what makes it a lot more successful in your presentations as well.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That is correct.
Yeah, I think like when people, I don't know, I don't have as much experience as you, but from like my understanding, I think a really important aspect too is almost like creating a character. Like, you know how you want to embody a boss, you want people to remember you from like certain aspects, because they're not going to get to know all of you, they're not going to get to know everything about you. But if you come across as like someone who's like really enthusiastic about this subject, and you're like kind of really into it, and you're like a little nerdy, then people will be like, oh yeah, that's that person, or like that's that person, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I know that you created this like blockchain project a couple of years ago where you could like people could upload like genetic data, and then I think get paid in return. And then I think you were acquired by Consensys, is that right?
So
Or
not
like
explicitly, not explicitly acquired. I continued working on it at Consensys.
So how did Consensys like find you? Did you find them? And like how was that experience overall, like working on something like that?
Yeah. It was amazing. And it was made by networking. Like I say that again because it is literally the thing that like I did not get where I'm at with all my experiences by myself. So many people helped me along the way. And I don't like, I cannot reiterate that enough. I met the people at Consensys. I went to a hackathon in Toronto called the Crypto Chicks Hackathon. And I met Kevin, who works at Consensys, and I shared with him my idea for this genetic data platform. And we pretty much sat for a long time and we brainstormed, and together we built this project. And then I ended up winning the hackathon, and there was a bunch of higher up people in the audience as judges who were from Consensys. And then they offered, after I'd like refined it up a little bit more, and checked in with them later to come and continue the work at Consensys. So it was pretty much based solely on having a good idea, showing enthusiasm, and like building relationships with people who worked at that company. And I think ultimately that's how all jobs are given. Applying online is actually a really inefficient way to get a job. It's much more efficient to know someone who is there, who does the hiring. That's how I've gotten literally all of my jobs.
Yeah, and how did you get that idea for that blockchain project, and what was like the reasoning for creating it?
I had previously done work in genetic editing research, so I spent a while working at the Cone Lab at SickKids Hospital, which does gene editing research. Their projects are amazing there. There's one research study that they are trying to cure muscular dystrophy, which is a genetic mutation that causes a disease that's really hard. And they ended up seeing really amazing results in mouse models. I think they're moving to clinical trials soon, if they haven't already. And I was working on another project which tried to cure PMD, which is another type of disorder caused by a genetic mutation in mice using gene editing technology. Essentially, in our body, we all have DNA, and DNA programs everything. It programs our cells, it programs how we live, and errors in this DNA can cause different really harmful diseases. So new gene editing tools have let people go in and fix these mutations or these errors in our genetic code. And then as a result, we can fix the disease and we can reprogram our cells. So that's what gene editing does. So I worked there for a while. And then I realized, after talking to a bunch of people at the lab and doing research, that it's essentially just based off of data. So how do you know which genes need to be fixed? How do you know which genes are the problem in the first place? And that you get from large data sets of people that have the disease and don't have the disease, of their genetic information, and you try and pull insights to be able to create drugs and therapies and cures. But the problem was that these drugs, or these data sets didn't have genetic data from people from a variety of different backgrounds. And additionally, the data is not secure. So a lot of people are really scared to give their genetic data to healthcare institutions because they don't want their genetic information to be used against them. It's really private information. And it shows all of your strengths, all of your weaknesses, biologically in this genetic code. So a lot of people don't even want to share it in the first place. So how can you fix those two problems of security and privacy and also accessibility? So that's where the idea came from.
How could your genetic data be used against you? Like, what form would that take?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different things. There was recently a law that was passed in Canada, which I think it went to the courts, Supreme Court. That was like the debate about whether insurance companies should be able to see your genetic information. So for example, let's say they know that you'll have Alzheimer's, or you're more likely to have breast cancer. They can charge you higher premiums. But like, what if you don't want to know whether or not you'll have Alzheimer's because you can't really do anything to change it? Like, I don't want to know, to be honest. But some people would love to know. They would want to be aware. So there's a lot of questions to ask there. Let's say certain people respond differently to certain like biochemical weapons, for example. There could be different information in genetic code located there as well. For example, if some people are like just naturally, because of their DNA, stronger against certain harmful things than others, that could be used as well.
Yeah. That's kind of crazy. I actually heard recently that you were like accepted into the Masason Foundation. So first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
And second of all, can you tell us a little bit about what what the Masason Foundation is, and what that's kind of going to do for you?
Totally. Um, the Masason Foundation was started by Masayoshi-san, who is an amazing, amazing man. And he's like also the leader behind the Vision Fund. I'm sure you've heard of. So it's like this large venture capital fund, which is funding a bunch of really insane companies everywhere, doing crazy things. So basically, it's this fund for people who they think are going to help contribute to humanity's future, and they want to help fund us and support us in any way possible. I still need to get this confirmed, but I think they're paying most or all of my tuition for Stanford, which is very kind of them. And they offer grants and scholarships for people to help them do research, to help them do their education, to help them along their journey. And in return, they don't explicitly ask for anything. Rather, they just want to help you greatly impact humanity. I think they're focused, or like one of their focuses is artificial intelligence, machine learning. I talked about neurotech, but there's people from like a wide variety of different interests in the foundation. They also host a variety of events to like get people to know each other. I'll let you know more about the foundation as I become more involved.
Yeah, and isn't it like there's like people from like 11-year-olds all the way to like people that are graduated from university? Like, what's the age range?
Yeah.
And how did you like apply for it?
I applied by filling out the application online, and the age range is something like that. I don't know the specific numbers, but that would like 11 to 25, something like that.
That's interesting. To wrap it up, I kind of want to like reflect on like you've done so much in your high school experience. Is there anything that really stands out to you in terms of like what you learned from high school, and stuff like that?
Yes. I think I didn't. So if you were to look at my experience, it would be like you started in gene editing, then blockchain, but then you went to neurotech, but then you went to AI. Like, what are you doing? And I think I just followed what I enjoyed rather than trying to sell myself as a story. I think sometimes people are like, I am going to go into AI, so I'm going to do this and then be there, which I think has a lot of merit. But for me, it was different. I just did what I was fascinated by and I enjoyed in the moment. And I think I wouldn't have done it any other way. I oftentimes get a lot of people asking me, like, should I do this activity for college admissions? Should I do this for college? Should I do that for college? And I really believe that college admissions are to a certain level random, in the sense that it depends whether someone likes you, and you can't guarantee that someone will like you. And there's a lot of people who don't like me, which is so fine, because you're not going to please everybody. So the question ends up becoming, what would you regret doing the activity if you got rejected from all of your colleges? So I genuinely, if I got rejected from all my colleges, I wouldn't care, because I did the things that I enjoyed the most. Like, I genuinely did the things that I loved and made me so happy and made me feel purpose. And I learned so much that it really didn't matter what came out of it. In terms of college, I don't think that should be the end goal, but for so many people it is. So working from it from like an additional perspective is really good. Stepping back though, I think I learned a lot about myself these past few years. And I'm just like, I'm so happy. Like, I'm really proud of myself. I really love myself, to be honest. And I think that it's been a really fun journey with myself. and I'm excited to see where it will go. I'm excited to keep going and keep learning. I've learned so much. Like I don't have enough time to share all the things that I've learned in my life. And I've grown so much. Like I've developed values and principles over the past few years. I think I've become like a much kinder person. I've like learned about things that motivate me, things that don't excite me. I've learned what kind of people I enjoy hanging out with, what kind of personalities I like to have. And yeah, I'm excited to like keep learning and growing.
Yeah, I mean, you're a super interesting speaker, really smart. I'm sure like a lot of like our viewers slash listeners want to like reach you. So like, how can they reach you? Is there any social media channel?
Yeah, you can DM me on Twitter at Ananya CHDH. So yeah, I'm sure you can.
Yeah, we'll link
Yeah.
those all in the description, and also we'll link your YouTube channel. So you gotta watch that networking video, guys.
Okay, this is the last question. But if you could say one sentence to like grade 9 Anya, what would you say? Like, what advice would you give her?
Grade 9 Ananya. Let's see. Where was I in grade 9? Grade 9, I was just starting gene editing research. Oh my God, that was such a long time ago. Wow. Yeah, I was learning about neurotech for the first time. So I think people ask that question, like, what would you have done differently when you were in grade 9? Like, what is it, some advice? I genuinely wouldn't have done anything differently. Like I couldn't have known better. I learned from my mistakes. I make a ton of mistakes. Oh, to the viewers, always forgive yourself. I think forgiveness is so important. I've made mistakes. I've done great things. But I think it like you can't harp on yourself for have done something differently because you couldn't have really known. Like if you know, like things will always turn out bad, but to a certain extent, like it was out of your control. You couldn't have known better. So don't worry about it too much. Just move forward, learn from it. So there's really nothing I don't think I would say.
That's a pretty good outlook, I would say. So advice, just forgive yourself. And I think that's a good way to end the podcast. So thank you for being on. It's been really interesting.
Wait, also forgive,
Okay.
I feel like comes from a negative place. Like it assumes you did something negative in the first place. So don't forgive. Just like, I think just respect yourself. And like love yourself sounds so trite, but I think that there's merit in the sense that you are the only person that you are with your whole life. And so how can you create the best relationship with yourself possible? Because that's ultimately the only person that is important, like that you will be living with forever. And I think something important to recognize is you can have different contradictions within yourself at once. Your brain tells you to do this, your heart tells you to do this, your procrastination genes tell you to do this, and you're so confused as to what you should be doing. Like I'm sure you guys have been like, even like an easy scenario, like I should be doing homework but I'm watching YouTube. Like you have conflicts between yourself all the time.
Yeah.
And how can you satisfy those inner conflicts and achieve a state of like inner harmony or inner alignment? I think is super powerful. So you are all innerly aligned as to you are doing what you want to be doing. You are thinking the way you want to be thinking. You like the way your other parts of you are operating. And if you don't feel innerly aligned, you don't like something about yourself, then you can change it. And you can alter like these inner wants and desires. There's really interesting philosophical lectures about people and the way that they, like sometimes it can cause a lot of inner harm, depression, PTSD when people behave in ways that they don't want to be like, and it causes a large disconnect there. I'm going on such a tangent.
No worries.
It keep going.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
For example, people who have PTSD oftentimes have PTSD because they do something really terrible in war. They themselves do something terrible. It's oftentimes not because they see something terrible, it's because they did something terrible. And that's a really hard thing to go through because you face a lot of but you were doing it because you were fighting for your nation. So then there's a contradiction within oneself.
Yeah.
And it can cause a lot of harm if yourself is not totally aligned. So I think it's important to think about what one part of you wants, and the things that are stopping the rest of you from backing up what that one part of you wants. If there's anything you need to change, like I had one person come to me and say, I don't like my personality. Then you can, I think it's so valid to try different things and see what sticks with you. Because you are not confined to anything. If you want to be doing something, but you're doing something else, then try and find some inner alignment there. Because I think that ultimately creates like self-love, respect. Like, I think when you work hard and you make sacrifices and you have discipline, you also get like more self-love, because you're like, wow, I have so much respect for myself. Like, wow, that was so cool what I did today. Like, I did something difficult. I have so much respect for myself. Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of work we can do on ourselves. I think people don't talk about self-work. When you talk about it, sometimes people laugh about it, they deride it. But I think self-work is like something that allows you to become super powerful, and it gives you inner strength and can help you a lot on your journey.
Yeah. And I mean, going through high school, there's like, it's such a complicated time for a lot of people. And like when you're told, oh, you got to wake up at this time, you got to do homework at this time, everything like that, it's so hard to keep in perspective why you're doing these things and like why you want to do this. And like, it's a very, very difficult time, I think, for you to, you know, be happy with yourself and doing what you want to do, because there's just so much going on. And so I think that's like a really valuable lesson.
Yeah, and I think like personally, I don't know about you guys, like quarantine has definitely helped in the sense that like there's time to just like think, reflect, evaluate on yourself, and just like change and do like think deep inside of you and like what you actually want to do, what kind of person you want to be. And especially as Sloan said, like high school is the time where you kind of like start to like become someone and like start to develop substance and become interesting. So it's like important to definitely prioritize yourself. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a good note to end it on, even better than the last one. So I think that's where we'll end it. Thank you for coming to the
Thank you,
podcast.
Ananya.
This has been really interesting. And this has been a Wavefront podcast with Drew and Sloan and Ananya. We'll see you next time. Bye.